Rope and chain. The Barrens is rotting. Too long subject to the corrupting touch of the Druge spring magic is taking its toll. The trees teem with bloated vermin. The marshes buzz with rancid sickness. Every drop of water, every drop of rain is infused with the taint of the rivers run red. Every wound festers, turning any injury into potential death sentences. The Druge seem to like it that way. Since the Imperial armies carved the steel causeway through the heart of the Barrens, the territory has been quiet. The Druge are surely here, hiding among the trees behind the walls of the Spies of Dusk, a trap waiting to snap shut around the Empire's soldiers, should they return to continue their conquest of the Barrens. Yet the Empire didn't come. The Druge trap remained unsprung. Instead, the Imperial armies were busy closing the noose around the Druge in the south, trapping the Orc armies in Zenith, turning the tables on the would-be tyrants of Urizen. As the Druge in the south flee, however, the northern Orc forces strike. They are led by the Black Wind, the army made up of the Orcs from the Western Barrens, who have a particular hatred for the people of Dawn, perhaps banking on the fact the Empire will be occupied in the south. Druge armies emerge from the hiding to try and close the Steel Causeway, to recapture Hope's Rest and the Carmen Fields. They pour out of the woods and the marshes, a teeming host of vicious warriors, easy enough to overwhelm the troops left behind to maintain the Imperial presence in the Central Barrens. Unopposed, they would quickly collapse the causeway and retake the lands the Empire had conquered. Unopposed, they would easily return the Barrens to the unquestioned Druge dominance. Unopposed, victory would be unquestionable. But the Druge have miscalculated again. They are not unopposed. Half a dozen Imperial armies, 30,000 soldiers, and perhaps as many as 15,000 warriors from independent warbands that support them are already moving to reinforce the causeway, bringing more of the Barrens under their control. At the forefront of the Imperial advance, where they have been almost every time the Empire has come to the Barrens, a Griffin's Pride. They lead the attack, pushing the Druge to controlled regions and leaving their allies the task of shoring up the borders of the Steel Causeway. They are joined by the Knights and Yeofolk of the Golden Sun, marching across the Northern Empire from Semisuak, empowered by the potent autumn magic, to make the crossing in time to fight alongside their fellow Dornish warriors. Once again, the Dornish fight beside their Varushkan allies, the Northern Eagles and the Iron Helms, follow the lead of Griffin's Pride. Carefully pressing the Druge defences, striking quickly when they can, but avoiding direct confrontation whenever possible. Slowly but surely, the tactics push the Druge back, expanding the boundaries of the Steel Causeway east and west. As well as Dawn and Varushka, League and Highguard have also come to the Barrens. The valiant Pegasus crusades against the Druge, eager to see the successes of Zenith reenacted in the Barrens, hoping perhaps to inspire the steep of subject Orcs in some fashion. They will have their work cut out for them. The Wolves of War, by contrast, echo the tactics of the Rushkans, grinding forward carefully, consolidating their gains, readying support by free companies recruited in Hulburg, eager for another chance to strike again against the Druge. Wolves and Brambles. The Imperial armies are supported by even stranger allies. 3 days after the first troops set foot in the Barrens, dozens of immense white wolves, larger than oxes, joined the fight against the Druge. Individually, they would have little impact, but they fight like a disciplined pack. Their bone-chilling howls strike fear into the heart of the Druge, but inspire the Imperial soldiers that fight alongside them, especially those with Draugr blood. They are more than mere savage beasts. They speak with a low, growling voices, explaining that they are servants of the Weltmaster, secured by the pact to fight in the Barrens. Their interest lies more in keeping the Druge from overwhelming the Steel Causeway than expanding its boundaries. But their presence leaves the Empire armies free to take the battle to the hated foe. And take the battle they do. A week after the autumn equinox, silent knights wrapped in all-encompassing suits of black plate steel, servants of the Bound King, join the Griffin's Pride with their assault against the Bitter Strand. The knights never talk. They seem to exist merely to drive their enemies before them. For the time being, the enemies are the enemies of Dawn. Their service has been bought by sacrifice that their master gives license to feed upon the magic of Dawn by the Imperial Conclave. They avoid the servants of Sorin. For their part, the great white wolves seem to ignore the Black Knights, but it is noticeable that there are no agreements when both sets of heralds are present at the same time. The Druge are not without magic allies of their own. The servants of Arhalogen fight openly alongside the orcs, in particular abominational horrors with heads of savage insects. A company and army the Empire has not seen before. A fresh force of orcs whose banners are marked with crimson brambles, a strange device never before seen amongst the Druge, whose armies are always named after the poisonous beasts and their inhabited lands. Imperial veterans with their bitter experience fighting the Druge whisper among themselves as to where they have come from and what this means. It's difficult to get a feel for the number of the Druge fighting in the Barrens, but League scouts estimate that there are at least as many orc warriors as Imperial soldiers in the Barrens, without taking into account their supernatural allies or the garrisons of Spies of Dusk. And of course, Imperial progress is slowed by the magic wards that have been raised around the forest. The forest either side of the Steel Causeway twist with the corrupt magic striking against any Imperial forces that dare to push forward into Fardwell, the Bleaks, or the untrod groves. Despite their numbers and the advantages secured with the dark magic, the Druge fight callously. They seem almost to be testing Imperial resolve, striking quickly then retreating whenever possible. There are fewer pitched battles, but those that do take place are absolutely brutal. The orcs seem more interested in minimalising their own losses rather than inflicting on the Empire soldiers, apparently trusting to the spring magic they'd laid down to do the work for them. Teeth and Tempest. The caution serves to blunt the effectiveness of the attack. The Imperial forces in the Barrens are ultimately able not only to maintain control of the Steel Causeway, but slowly push outwards. The force of their advance in the Bitter Strands, the coast of the Barren Sea, and the mithril mine that leads along the shore, the defence of the Bitter Strand have been shattered thanks to a potent spring ritual enacted under the guidance of the Spring Archmage during the summer solstice. Taking advantage of the conjunction of the fountain, a band of Imperial heroes used the Senate Gate to unleash a devastating tempest against the northeastern Barrens. The bitter sea had poured inland and drowned the region of Saltmarsh in churning floodwaters. As soon as it became apparent where the Empire's strategy will take them, the Druge moved to intercept. Forced to face Imperial soldiers head-on, they fight with vicious desperation, and the churning waters of the hungry bitter sea are dyed red with the blood of human and orc alike, making manifest the spring curse that hangs over the territory. The Druge are desperate, and they're forced to fall back time and time again. Yet each time they retreat, they redouble their effort to attack again the next day. All their defences in Bitter Strand are in ruins, and despite having been the masters of the Bitter Sea for a generation or more, the recent magic tempest has reshaped the land to a degree that the Druge cannot use it to their advantage. As the winter solstice draws closer, the Druge are forced to secede part of the shoreline to the Empire, falling back eastward towards the Fangs, the rocky mithril mine that lies near the eastern shore of the Bitter Sea. Scouts report that the rocky columns that thrust out to the surface of the churning sea have experienced significant damage. Access is via a handful of makeshift bridges, even more precarious by the fact the shores of the sea have shifted. The damage from the magic storm means that it's doubtful the Druge will be able to hold the mine against a cohesive Imperial attack, assuming the Empire can conquer enough of the rocky coastline to threaten the mine. Hope and freedom. The situation in the Barrens is not straightforward, however, and that blunts the Imperial advance. The Imperial Synod has made it clear that there is more at stake in the Barrens than mere conquest. They have decreed the idea of the Barrens as a prize to be taken, and instead urged virtuous citizens to focus on rallying steppes and the subject tribes who labour under the oppressive tyrant of the Druge. At first it seems that urging might not sit well with the Dornish armies spearheading the campaign in the Barrens. The nation's ambitions there are common knowledge, and have been for centuries. Yet, to the surprise of many, the Troubadours of Dawn have agreed with the Synod. Indeed, they have embraced the idea of providing to the inhabitants of the Barrens they will do what they can to free them. The commitment to trying to make contact with the orcs and a handful of humans who chafe under the yoke of the Druge has cost the Empire. Without it, they might have come very close to conquering the entire Bitter Strands. Instead, they've been able to resist the Druge attempt to break the Steel Causeway and have made little progress in extending the amount of land they conquered. Yet they've made it clear as clear can be that they are not just here to as conquerors, not just here to replace the dominance of the Druge with a tyranny of their own. There are many orcs in the Bitter Strands, forced into servitude by the Fangs. They are warriors among the Black Winds who have no love for the monsters of Mormon. There are scattered pockets of forest orcs left behind in the Barrens where the majority of their steppe fled south into Thurin. While the Imperial armies hold against the Druge, embassies and scouts deliver a message of hope as best they can. The Druge can be beaten. The Empire are not the enemy. The Empire speaks. It remains to be seen if any of the Baron orcs are listening. Blood and death. So the Steel Causeway holds, despite the Druge effort to try and overrun it. The Empire has established a foothold in the Bitter Shore, and little more than that. The Druge still control the Barrens, and it's clear that the strategy has been cautious. Lightly shaken by their losses in Zenith, they have been testing the Empire's defences. If they had come in force, if they had shown disregard for their own lives that has characterised many conflicts over the last few years, then the situation might have been very different. Not only would the Empire have made little progress in expanding the Steel Causeway, it's likely the Druge would have begun to dismantle it, had they come in force. As it is, with the butcher's bill is tailed, the Empire's losses are sobering indeed. 6,000 Imperial lives ended in the Barrens in the space of a season. Ended by Druge arrows, by deadfalls and traps, by poison spears, by the feasting of rot that comes from the spring curse. If the Empire had not favoured its own cautious advances, the losses would be even worse. It's impossible to be certain how many Druge have died, but surely they must have paid at least as steep price as the Empire. The Varushkans in particular speak of mounds of dead orcs put to the torch along the margins of the Steel Causeway, and the columns of greasy black smoke that accompanies them is visible across most of the northern Barrens. Game information. The Barrens. The Empire still holds the Carmen Fields and Hope's Rest, and is perhaps a fifth of the way towards capturing Bitter Strands. A combination of careful strategy and the influence of the Synod have greatly reduced the Empire's ability to claim territory in the Barrens. Imperial armies have a 1/5 penalty to conquering territory in the Barrens, with the exception of Urizen and Varushka. Thanks to their own mandate, the Dornish armies have had a 3/10 penalty instead. The reduction applies only to victory points for those taking territory, not to casualties dealt or suffered. The residual effects of the recent magic storm have been observed firsthand by Imperial scouts. The eastern regions of Saltmarsh no longer have the marshy quality, meaning it is not a suitable target for twisted echoes of the fen, but rather counts as a coastal until at least the start of the summer solstice. There are two cruel armies in the Barrens, the Iron Helms and the Black Wind. Both possess these qualities. Neither has engaged in the merciless onslaught this season. Participation. The Barrens. Any Draugr character whose military unit was engaged in the Barrens this season may have fought alongside the Wolves of Sorin. These potential heralds of winter eternals have a particular fascination for those with Draugr blood, and extend a particular influence over them. If you choose to have fought alongside them, you can expect a lingering roleplay effect. Your innate pack mentality is greatly strengthened, making you extremely protective and jealously possessive of family and friends, and with a strong tendency to view strangers and acquaintances as threats and rivals, and even enemies. You feel an urge to exert dominance over those you view as owing to you. You find it easy to demand that those you protect treat you with reverence. This role-playing effect will have faded by the end of the winter solstice, but as long as you continue to engage in the role-playing, you gain an additional hero point, even if you do not normally have any hero points. The River's Run Red curse that lies over the Barrens has significantly increased the casualties on both sides. Any character whose military unit has been engaged in the Barrens this season, and the generals of each of the armies deployed there, will find a lingering traumatic wound in their pack at the start of the event. These represent persistent injuries sustained during a campaign, worsened by the effects of the Spring Curse. They are entirely opt-in, intended to allow players to reinforce the savagery of the fight in the Barrens, and if you don't wish to have a lingering injury, feel free to discard the traumatic wound.